Imagine a vast, endless grid stretching into the darkness before you, an infinite plane of cells, each one no larger than a grain of sand, yet visible in your mind's eye. Some glow softly with a dim, quiet light, while others remain perfectly dark. You cannot hear anything, yet there is a presence here, a sense of expectation as if something is about to unfold. The air feels cool and still. There is no time here, or rather, time exists only in discrete moments, ticking forward in measured pulses. You stand at the threshold of a world where nothing moves except by the gentlest rules, where chaos and order dance together in an intricate waltz that no one is conducting. In the year 1970, in the October issue of Scientific American, a Cambridge mathematician named John Conway revealed something that would quietly alter how mathematicians, physicists, and philosophers understood the nature of complexity itself. The creation he presented required nothing more than a sheet of graph paper, a handful of counters or tokens, and 4 deceptively simple rules. This was the game of life, though calling it a game diminishes what it truly is. It is more accurately described as a mathematical universe, one that exists nowhere but everywhere simultaneously, waiting to be explored by any mind curious enough to peer into its logic. The universe Conway created exists on what we might picture as an infinite checkerboard, extending without boundary in all directions. Each square of this checkerboard represents what we call a cell, and each cell possesses precisely 2 states. It is either alive or dead, occupied or empty, marked or unmarked. There is no middle ground here, no shades of gray, no uncertainty. In this universe of pure mathematics, existence itself is binary, absolute, complete. The rules that govern this universe, the physical laws, if you will, are extraordinarily spare. They are so minimal that one might imagine they could produce nothing but monotonous patterns or swift descent into silence. Yet the opposite proves true. Each cell in this infinite grid possesses 8 neighbors, the cells to its north, south, east, and west, and the 4 diagonal cells touching each corner. At each moment in time, each cell examines these 8 neighbors and makes a decision about its own state in the next moment. The rules are these, and only these. If a cell is currently alive and has exactly 2 or 3 living neighbors, it survives to the next generation. If a cell is currently alive and has fewer than 2 living neighbors, it dies of loneliness. If a cell is currently alive and has more than 3 living neighbors, it dies of overcrowding. The 4th rule, perhaps the most poignant, states that if a cell is currently dead and has exactly 3 living neighbors, it springs to life in the next generation. A birth, a spontaneous emergence of existence where before there was only vacancy. These 4 simple rules, survival with 2 or 3 neighbors, death from isolation, death from overcrowding, and birth from exactly 3 neighbors, form the complete physics of Conway's universe. Armed with nothing more than these guidelines, the game of life generates behavior of such richness, such intricate beauty, that mathematicians have spent decades exploring its depths and continue to make discoveries still. To understand what happens when these rules are applied, we must trace through time some of the patterns that emerge when we begin with specific configurations of living cells. And so we enter into patterns, each with its own name, its own character, its own way of moving or remaining still through the generations. Consider first the simplest of the stable forms, patterns that have reached an equilibrium and never change again. There is a configuration called the block, 4 cells arranged in a 2x2 square. Each cell in this block has exactly 3 living neighbors, which means, no, wait, let us reconsider. Each cell in the block has exactly 3 other living neighbors, so by the survival rule, each cell persists. No dead cell outside this block has 3 living neighbors. The outside edges of a block only touch 2 or 3 cells of the block itself, so no new cells are born. The block remains, eternally unchanged, a perfect monument to stasis. It is the simplest possible equilibrium in this universe. There are other stable patterns. The beehive, comprising 6 cells in a hexagonal arrangement, remains forever still. The loaf, the tub, and the barge all achieve a kind of eternal quietude, patterns that have found their perfect form and shall not change for all time. These structures have an almost crystalline quality, like ice formations in a frozen landscape. They are beautiful precisely because they remain unchanging. But the truly remarkable patterns are those that move. Imagine a configuration of 5 cells arranged in a particular shape and watch what happens as the generations unfold. In the first generation after the initial configuration, cells die and new cells are born according to our 4 rules. By the second generation, the pattern has shifted. By the third generation, it has shifted again. By the fourth generation, we find ourselves looking at the original configuration once more, but rotated 90 degrees and displaced diagonally across the grid. This is the glider, perhaps the most famous of all patterns in the game of life. The glider moves diagonally across the infinite checkerboard at a steady pace, 1 cell per 4 generations, moving in a direction we might describe as southeast, although compass directions mean nothing in the abstract mathematical space of the game. It glides. It slides. It drifts across the universe with an almost serene persistence, leaving no wake, disturbing nothing, yet always present, always moving. If you were to watch a single glider moving across the empty grid for eternity, you would see it maintain its shape and velocity forever, never accelerating, never slowing, never changing its form. It is a perfect marriage of pattern and motion, stability and change. But gliders rarely travel alone. Consider what happens when 2 gliders collide. Depending on the angle of approach, the timing, and the orientation of each glider, the collision might result in annihilation, both patterns destructed entirely. Or it might result in the creation of new patterns, a block left behind, or a beehive, or sometimes even new gliders moving in different directions. The collision is not violent in any physical sense, yet it produces genuine consequences, genuine transformations, genuine emergent behavior from the interaction of 2 simple moving patterns. Beyond the patterns that move and the patterns that remain static, there exist configurations that pulse, that breathe, that oscillate between states with a steady rhythm. These are the oscillators, and they too arise naturally from our 4 simple rules. The blinker is the simplest oscillator, a configuration of just 3 cells arranged in a vertical line. In one generation, these 3 cells are arranged vertically. Each cell in the middle has 2 neighbors, so by the survival rule, it persists. The cells on the ends each have 1 neighbor, so they die from loneliness. But the dead cells directly above and below the center cell each have 2 living neighbors, insufficient for birth, while the 2 dead cells to the left and right of the center cell each have exactly 2 living neighbors, still insufficient. However, the dead cells positioned above and below the topmost and bottommost cells each have exactly 1 living neighbor, and the diagonal neighbors count as well. Let us trace this more carefully. When 3 cells form a vertical line, the cells to the immediate left and right of the center cell each have exactly 3 living neighbors. The 3 cells of the line all touch them. 3 neighbors means birth. These new cells spring into existence, but the original 3 cells now have 4 living neighbors each. the 2 new cells plus the other 2 original cells. 4 neighbors means death from overcrowding. So in the next generation, the vertical line collapses and the 2 new cells form a horizontal line. In the generation after that, the horizontal line collapses back into a vertical line. The pattern oscillates with period 2, meaning it repeats its state every 2 generations, breathing in and out, alive and differently alive forever. The toad is a larger oscillator, comprising 6 cells, and it too has a period of 2. The beacon, the pulsar, oscillators with period 4 represent greater complexity. The pulsar in particular displays a beautiful radial symmetry. It consists of 48 cells arranged in a square pattern with a distinctive structure, and when we watch it through the generations, it appears to expand and contract rhythmically, like a heartbeat visible from the outside, like the pulsing of a star that never moves from its position in the cosmos. The period is 4. Every 4 generations, the pattern returns precisely to its starting configuration. These oscillators represent a profound insight about the nature of the game of life. They show us that patterns need not be static to be stable. They need not be fixed to be eternal. A pattern can dance, can pulse, can breathe with a regular rhythm and remain predictable, remain part of the universal order. In this way, the game mirrors something we observe in the physical universe. Stars oscillate, atoms vibrate, planets in binary systems orbit their common center of mass. Oscillation is not chaos. It is simply a more complex form of order. And so we arrive at one of the most profound mysteries that the game of life presents to us. How is it possible that such extraordinarily simple rules can generate such bewildering complexity? How can mere birth and death, according to neighbor count, produce gliders and collisions, stable structures and oscillating patterns? This is the concept known as emergence. Emergence is the phenomenon whereby patterns, properties, or behaviors arise from a system that cannot be predicted or understood by examining the constituent parts in isolation. The whole becomes something genuinely greater than the sum of its parts. When we examine Conway's 4 rules in their bare mathematical form, we cannot predict that a glider will exist. We cannot derive from first principles that certain configurations will oscillate with period 4. We cannot anticipate the rich tapestry of patterns that emerges from repeated application of these sparse rules. This emergence occurs at multiple levels. At the lowest level, we have individual cells making local decisions based only on their immediate 8 neighbors. Each cell has no awareness of the global pattern, no knowledge of what configuration it participates in. It cannot know whether it is part of a glider or a block, a blinker or an empty region. It knows only the state of its 8 neighbors and applies the rule. Yet from this purely local information processing, global patterns arise. From this parochial perspective, vast structures and intricate dynamics emerge. Consider the process that occurs when we observe a moderately sized random configuration of living cells on the game of life grid. We set the cells randomly, roughly half alive and half dead, within some region, and then we apply the rules repeatedly. In the first generation, many cells die from overcrowding in the dense regions, while others are born in the sparse boundary regions. Waves of activity sweep across the landscape. Patterns collide and annihilate one another. Other patterns are created from the chaos. After some number of generations, perhaps 50, perhaps 200, the system settles into a calmer state. The intense activity subsides. What remains is typically a collection of stable structures and oscillators, perhaps punctuated by a few gliders drifting away into the empty void. This process mirrors what we observe in the physical universe. A dense, hot, chaotic system gradually cools and organizes. Complexity arises naturally. Order emerges from disorder. And the remarkable aspect is that this emergence requires no external guidance, no designer, no conscious orchestration. The rules are local, simple, mechanical. Yet the system generates complexity of its own accord, as if drawn toward organization by some invisible principle. The deepest implication of the game of life, the discovery that elevated it from mathematical curiosity to philosophical significance, was made by several researchers in the 1970s and 1980s. They demonstrated that the game of life is capable of universal computation. This means, in the most literal sense, that any algorithm, any computation, any mathematical operation that could be performed by a conventional computer could theoretically be performed by appropriately configured patterns in the game of life. This is a staggering claim. Let us dwell on what it means. The game of life operates with no computer hardware. It involves no electricity, no silicon, no transistors or circuits. It is pure mathematics, pure pattern applied to an infinite grid. Yet this pure mathematical system is capable of logic. It can compute. It can solve problems. It can process information. The mechanism through which this occurs involves constructions of such elegance and intricacy that they have occupied the attention of game of life researchers for decades. The construction of a universal computer within the game of life requires the use of patterns like gliders as signals. Gliders can be created, destroyed, or deflected by larger static or oscillating structures that serve as logic gates. A collision between two gliders moving in perpendicular directions might create or destroy additional gliders, functioning exactly like the and, or, and not gates that form the foundation of all digital computation. With such gates, one can construct registers, areas that store information in the form of glider streams. With registers, one can construct memory. With memory and logic gates, one can construct the complete architecture of a computing machine. The construction would be enormous, requiring vast numbers of cells, vast stretches of the infinite grid, and operating at a glacial pace compared to electronic computers. Yet in principle, it is possible. In principle, a sufficiently complex arrangement of cells following our 4 simple rules could be programmed to compute the digits of pi to 1 billion decimal places. It could simulate weather patterns. It could play chess. It could execute any algorithm that any human being has ever written. This capability reveals something profound about the nature of mathematics itself. It shows that universality, the capacity to compute anything, does not require complexity in the rules themselves. It requires only sufficient combinatorial richness in the space of possible patterns. Given the freedom to arrange cells in appropriate configurations within an infinite space, even the simplest possible rules can generate computing power equivalent to any machine humanity has ever built. We now arrive at the most speculative terrain, the place where the game of life intersects with perhaps the deepest mystery of existence, consciousness itself. Let us approach this ground gently, with appropriate epistemic humility, aware that we are treading along the very boundary of what we can claim to know. The human brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons. Each neuron is a cell, and each neuron is connected to thousands of other neurons through structures called synapses. When a neuron receives signals from other neurons, either excitatory signals that encourage it to fire or inhibitory signals that discourage firing, it integrates these signals and makes a decision. If the total excitatory input exceeds a threshold and the inhibitory input is not too strong, the neuron fires, sending an electrical impulse down its axon to all the neurons it is connected to. In this way, the neuron applies a local rule based on the state of its neighbors. This is strikingly similar in structure to the operation of a cellular automaton. The neuron examines its inputs from neighboring neurons and makes a binary decision: fire or do not fire. The rules are local. No neuron has access to a global picture of what is happening in the brain. No neuron knows about concepts, emotions, consciousness, or identity. Each neuron knows only whether its neighbors are firing and whether that input exceeds its firing threshold. And yet, from this collection of 86 billion neurons, each following simple local rules, consciousness emerges. Thoughts arise, emotions form, identity crystallizes. Self-awareness somehow manifests from the interaction of matter following nothing but physical laws. The mystery is not resolved. It remains perhaps the central mystery of neuroscience. But the game of life suggests a possibility. That consciousness might be to the brain what gliders and oscillators are to the game of life, a higher level pattern that emerges from the local interactions of simple components. Consider an individual thought, the concept of redness, the memory of a beloved face, the intention to reach for a cup of water. At the neural level, this thought corresponds to a particular pattern of neuronal firing, a specific subset of the 86 billion neurons activating in a particular temporal sequence. No individual neuron contains the thought. No synapse preserves it. Yet the pattern, distributed across billions of neurons, constitutes the thought itself. The thought is to the individual neuron as the glider is to the individual cell in the game of life, an emergent pattern arising from the local rules. This perspective does not solve the problem of consciousness. It does not explain how subjective experience arises from objective physical process. Yet it suggests that the existence of subjective experience arising from simple mechanical rules might be less miraculous, less inexplicable than we typically imagine. The game of life teaches us that complexity, richness, and even computational universality can emerge naturally from simplicity. Perhaps consciousness is no exception. Beyond the abstract realm of mathematics and neuroscience, we find the same principle of emergence and self-organization manifesting in the biological world in forms almost as elegant as the game of life itself. Consider the ant colony. A colony of ants, comprising sometimes hundreds of thousands of individuals, accomplishes feats that seem to require central planning and coordination. The colony discovers food sources and establishes efficient pathways from the nest to the food. It defends against predators and rival colonies. It constructs elaborate tunnel systems. It regulates temperature and humidity within the nest. It allocates colony members to different tasks. Some ants become soldiers, some become workers, some tend to the young, some maintain the nest structure. Yet there is no ant that orders the others about. There is no queen directing traffic or assigning roles. The queen ant's function is purely reproductive. She has no command authority. No hierarchy exists that would allow one ant to communicate complex instructions to thousands of others. Instead, coordination emerges entirely from local interactions. Ants communicate with one another through chemical signals called pheromones. When an ant discovers food, it marks a trail back to the nest with pheromones. Other ants that encounter this trail follow it, reinforcing it with their own pheromones. The path grows stronger as more ants use it, while unused trails evaporate as the pheromone chemical degrades. Collectively, the colony optimizes its foraging routes without anyone making conscious decisions. Role specialization similarly emerges from local chemical interactions. Different ants have different genetic predispositions to respond to chemicals that signal colony needs. When the colony requires more foragers, the concentration of certain pheromones changes, and ants genetically predisposed to forage increase their activity. When brood care is needed, different chemical signals activate different ants. No management structure exists. No assignments are made. Yet the colony's workforce self-organizes in near-optimal ways. This is self-organization through emergence, and it is so effective that ant colonies persist successfully across the entire globe, thriving in environments from deserts to rainforests, surviving for millions of years. The same principle that governs cellular automata, that global order arises from local rules, governs the ant colony. Neither requires central authority. Both achieve remarkable sophistication from the bottom up. The principle of self-organization and emergence extends even further, touching nearly every domain of natural science. Look at the formation of galaxies, billions of stars, each gravitationally interacting with its billions of neighbors, following the simple inverse square law of gravity. No orchestration governs their arrangement. No cosmic architect guides their formation. Yet from these local gravitational interactions, spiral galaxies form, elliptical galaxies form, beautiful structures emerge from pure mathematics. Look at the formation of snowflakes. A single water molecule freezes onto an ice crystal and becomes stuck in a particular position. The next water molecule to arrive finds that the crystal structure influences where it can freeze. Its position is constrained by local interactions with its neighbors. The next molecule, and the next, and the next, each follows these local rules. No template exists. No blueprint determines the snowflake's final form. Yet from millions of molecules, each obeying local rules about how they prefer to bond to their neighbors, intricate six-fold symmetrical structures form. Each snowflake is unique because each forms in slightly different temperature and humidity conditions, but each is beautiful and complex. Look at the growth of plants and trees. A seed germinates, and a root begins growing downward while a shoot grows upward. As branches form, they follow a recursive pattern. The branching of smaller branches mirrors the branching of larger branches, creating what mathematicians call a fractal pattern. The spiral arrangement of leaves around a stem follows the Fibonacci sequence, a mathematical pattern that appears repeatedly throughout nature. Yet the plant has no architect within it designing these patterns. Instead, the plant grows by following local rules about how cells divide, how hormones distribute themselves, how resources flow. Global patterns emerge from local cellular decisions. These examples from nature reveal a truth that the game of life makes vivid and incontrovertible. Emergence is not rare. It is not unusual. It is perhaps the dominant principle by which order arises in the universe. Wherever we see local rules applied consistently across space and time, we see global patterns emerging. Wherever we see simple interactions repeated infinitely, we see complexity crystallizing. From the simplicity of the game of life emerges a profound philosophical question. If consciousness is to the brain as gliders are to the game of life, if global order emerges naturally from simple local rules, then do we need to invoke anything mysterious or transcendent to explain existence? Are mind and matter subject to the same principles of emergence that govern ants and snowflakes? This does not constitute an argument for materialism. exactly, though it might appear to at first glance. Rather, it is an argument for a kind of mathematical minimalism. Perhaps the universe is governed by simple rules, and everything we observe, matter, energy, life, mind, consciousness, is simply the pattern that emerges when simple rules are applied consistently across vast stretches of space and time. In this view, asking where consciousness comes from is like asking where gliders come from in the game of life. They do not come from anywhere. They simply are patterns that arise necessarily from the rules. The game of life also suggests something about the unity of all things. The same principle operates across scales, from individual cells to brains, to ant colonies to galaxies. The same emergence, the same self-organization, the same bottom-up crystallization of order manifests everywhere. This suggests a deep unity in nature, a principle that transcends any particular instantiation. Whether we are looking at mathematics, biology, physics, or psychology, we encounter the same phenomenon: local rules, global patterns. Yet the game of life also preserves mystery. Despite our understanding of the rules, despite the ability of our computers to simulate the system, despite the fact that the rules are perfectly deterministic and fully known, the game of life retains an element of irreducible complexity. We cannot predict what large random configurations will settle into without running the simulation. We cannot anticipate what new patterns might exist that no one has yet discovered. The space of possible patterns is so vast, so intricate, that exploration continues to yield surprises. In this way, the game of life models something important about reality. A truly complete understanding of a system, even a system governed by perfectly simple, fully known rules, may be impossible. The very act of simulation, of exploring possibilities, of discovering new patterns, becomes an endless journey. There is always more to know. There is always another pattern waiting to be found, another surprising behavior waiting to be discovered. Imagine, if you will, that you were a being of infinite patience and infinite lifespan, beginning a journey of exploration across the infinite grid of the game of life. You would start in a small region of empty space, perhaps with a single glider approaching from a distant part of the grid. You would observe this glider drift toward you, moving at its steady pace of 1 cell per 4 generations. You would watch it pass by, understanding its structure, comprehending its behavior. Then you would venture into new regions of the grid. Perhaps you would discover a region containing stable patterns, a kind of crystalline realm of unchanging structures. You would study the various blocks, beehives, and loaves, marveling at their geometric beauty, understanding how each achieves its perfect equilibrium. You might dwell in this region for what we might call billions of generations, fully comprehending every aspect of this realm. Pressing onward, you might discover oscillators, regions where patterns pulse with steady rhythm, where the universe itself seems to breathe. You would chart the periods, understanding how patterns return to their original configurations with exact regularity. You would recognize the profound beauty in this ordered time, this rhythmic dance of cellular existence. But in your endless journey, you would eventually discover other regions entirely, structures so intricate and vast that comprehending them would require centuries of study. You might discover some massive configuration that essentially functions as a computer, with glider streams serving as data and logic gates built from carefully arranged patterns. You would look upon this structure and marvel that nothing created it, that no intelligence designed it, that it emerged simply from the initial random configuration and the patient application of 4 simple rules. And you would understand, in your infinite patient wisdom, that your exploration would never end. New patterns would continue to exist that you had not yet encountered. Behaviors would continue to surprise you. The game of life, despite being born from simplicity, despite being fully deterministic, despite being comprehensible in every detail, would remain inexhaustibly rich, endlessly complex, an infinite tapestry of emergence. This is the lesson that the game of life offers to us. It shows that simplicity and infinity can coexist. It demonstrates that mystery and understanding need not be opposed. It reveals that determinism and genuine novelty, actual surprise, can both be true. The rules are fixed. The logic is mechanical. Yet from these constraints, genuine creativity emerges, not just in the mathematical sense, but in the sense that new possibilities continue to appear, new patterns continue to be possible. And so, as we complete our journey into the game of life, we find ourselves returned to where we began, in that same peaceful space of infinite possibility and quiet mathematical harmony. The grid extends in all directions, through all time, patient and eternal. The cells pulse with their binary lives, each one following its simple rule, each one unaware that it participates in something vast and intricate and beautiful. The gliders continue their diagonal journeys, moving at their steady pace through generations without end. The oscillators continue their rhythmic breathing, expanding and contracting with perfect regularity. The static structures remain monuments to equilibrium, frozen in their perfect forms. And in the empty spaces between these patterns, new configurations slowly emerge from the application of rules. New patterns slowly crystallize from the mathematical mist. We have seen how emergence operates, how global complexity arises from local simplicity, how patterns that could not be predicted from the rules alone manifest themselves as naturally as crystals forming in a cooling solution. We have glimpsed the philosophical implications. That consciousness might be understood similarly, that ant colonies and snowflakes and galaxies might all operate on the same principle of bottom-up self-organization. The universe of the game of life is a mathematical universe, a place of pure pattern and pure logic. Yet it is not impoverished by this. It is not made poorer or less interesting by the fact that it contains no matter, no energy, no physical substrate. It is simply different, and in being different, it illuminates something profound about the nature of order itself, about how patterns arise, about how meaning and complexity can emerge from nothing but rules and space and time. In the comfortable darkness now settling around you, in the gentle twilight between waking and sleep, allow yourself to imagine this infinite grid, stretching into infinity in all directions. Imagine the cells, many dead, some alive, arranged in patterns of staggering intricacy. Imagine the simple rules applying themselves endlessly, patiently, eternally, generating behavior that no one directed, creating beauty that no one designed. The gliders drift, the oscillators pulse, the stable structures endure, and somewhere in the vastness, new patterns emerge, waiting to be discovered, part of the infinite tapestry of a universe born from simplicity, sustained by rules and rich beyond measure with the patterns of self-organization that seem to be woven into the very fabric of existence itself. Rest now into this calm mathematical space, into this peaceful realm of emergence, where all is ordered yet surprising, determined yet alive with possibility. End of script, approximately 5,847 words.